In 1789, France created the modern blueprint for human rights, but soon that same revolution was engineering a state-sponsored police state. The path to that police state began with the math of the Ancien Regime. This diagram illustrates the legal hierarchy of the kingdom. The poorest 98% formed the base, bearing the entire tax burden, while the top 2% remained tax-exempt. That system shattered when France funded the American Revolution to humiliate Great Britain. The intervention cost 1.3 billion livres, a debt financed entirely through loans. By 1788, the cost of simply servicing the interest on those loans swallowed over 50% of the entire national budget. King Louis XVI needed to tax the wealthy nobility to avoid a total sovereign default. However, the aristocratic law courts blocked every reform attempt, effectively paralyzing the monarchy's ability to govern its own finances. The collapse of the French social order was a mathematically inevitable market correction, forced by a bankrupt treasury. While the treasury failed, the intellectual foundation of the monarchy was being dismantled. Enlightenment philosophers challenged the divine right of kings with the concept of popular sovereignty, the idea that power belongs to the people. Environmental crisis turned these theories into action. A severe drought followed by the brutal winter of 1788 destroyed grain harvests. As bread prices skyrocketed, an average Parisian worker was forced to spend 80% of their income just to eat. In July 1789, a mob seeking gunpowder stormed the Bastille, signaling the end of royal absolute power. Within weeks, the National Assembly legally abolished the feudal system, stripping the nobility of their ancient privileges in a single night. To replace the old order, they drafted the Declaration of the Rights of Man and of the Citizen. It promised equality before the law, natural rights, and protection from the arbitrary arrests that had defined the king's reign. For a brief window, the theories of the Enlightenment had successfully rewritten the laws of a global superpower. The new republic inherited the old kingdom's debts. Declaring human rights did not fill empty bakeries or pay off the state's massive international creditors. This document is an assignat, initially a state backed by confiscated church lands to stabilize the economy. The government soon overprinted it to fund wars, triggering hyperinflation. By 1795, it lost 97% of its value, destroying the working class. Desperation led to radicalisation. After King Louis XVI was caught attempting to flee the country and foreign armies invaded French soil, the National Convention abolished the monarchy. In January 1793, they executed the king. The intersection of economic starvation and foreign invasion shifted the public mood. The desire for liberty was replaced by a paranoid demand for absolute security at any cost. Maximilien Robespierre and the Committee of Public Safety answered that demand. Robespierre argued that in a time of revolution, virtue was powerless without terror, describing it as nothing other than justice, prompt, severe, and inflexible. To enforce this justice, the state passed the Law of Suspects in September 1793. It authorized the arrest of anyone whose conduct, associations, or casual speech suggested they were enemies of liberty. Mere suspicion became a legal basis for imprisonment. The government eventually removed the right to legal defense and the calling of witnesses. Revolutionary tribunals quickly became high-volume assembly lines for state executions, focusing entirely on brutal speed over actual evidence. This chart shows who actually died in the Reign of Terror. While targeting the elite, nobility comprised less than 10% of victims. Between 70 and 80% executed were peasants and the working class, ordinary citizens accused of minor dissent. The scale reached its peak in the Vendée Civil War. To suppress a royalist uprising, Republican forces were ordered to exterminate the population, resulting in 200,000 deaths through mass shootings and drownings. The absolute pursuit of moral purity had engineered the exact tyrannical police state the revolution was originally intended to prevent. By July 1794, the terror consumed its own leadership. Robespierre was arrested and guillotined without trial, ending the radical phase of the revolution and leaving a vacuum of power and public exhaustion. Napoleon Bonaparte filled that vacuum. Prioritizing order over ideological zeal, he stabilized the currency and consolidated rule through military power. Napoleon ended the democratic experiment of the Republic, but he preserved the revolution's structural gains. He codified the end of feudal privilege and ensured legal equality for all citizens, even as he replaced political liberty with authoritarian rule. After a decade of upheaval, the French people traded the instability of the Republic for the social stability of an empire. The French Revolution demonstrated that a millennium of absolute monarchy and feudalism could be dismantled by the will of the people in a single decade. But it also demonstrated the lethality of the law of suspects and the justification of mass purges. It proved how quickly the language of rights can be used to authorize state-sponsored violence. The era serves as a warning. Ideals like liberty and equality are not self-executing. Without rigid legal guardrails and due process, any vision of a perfect society can easily devour its own children.